Hello and welcome to the next edition of Lights on Europe. Today we speak to Corinna Hörst, who's a Deputy Director of German Marshall Fund's Brussels office, but also a founder of many initiatives which aim to give voice to women in town and especially fight against men-only panels at the Brussels-based conferences. However, today we don't speak so much about this project. We speak more about her most recent experience of going through a burnout, what it meant for her, her lifestyle, her vision of whether we can have it all, and what are her tips for self-care practices and really lifestyle decisions that we can consider if we want to find the right balance of professional self-expression, our engagement in empowering the communities that we care for, and in her case also being a single mother. So tune in, I'm sure you'll appreciate it, and especially appreciate her vulnerability and openness about all these issues. Hello Corinna, thanks for accepting the invitation.
Thank you for having me.
We're gonna start differently to what I expected a bit at the beginning. When we were preparing this conversation, I was used to discussing with you your GMF career and your stand for women empowerment, but then I found out that you went on a break and you went through a burnout experience. So maybe let's look at this immediately and kind of frame where you are now. In Brussels, we've known you as one of the most visible and known women who are very knowledgeable and very active in the transatlantic space and empowering everybody around. So I'm wondering, do we all have limits to our stand and the activities and projects that we stand for? And what are the lessons that you've been through these past months, and what are the conclusions when it comes to continuation of your previous projects? It's a big question, but I think it's probably the most interesting one to ask up front.
Yeah, and that's a question I'm thinking about, and I'm not done yet, so maybe we should talk again in a year. There are limits to what we human beings can do, and one of the things that I take away from the last few months is especially working in a policy environment where we are getting confronted on a daily basis with the crises that are in the world, from climate change to wars to populism. We can't fix it all, and an individual can't fix it all. Each of us have to find our own ways of what we can contribute towards a world as we envision it. So in my sense, it would be one that is, where there are principles of democracy and equal rights and human rights. So yes, I realized that after a couple of years very, very active in the policy environment, transatlantic, European, as well as in the field of women's empowerment, gender, diversity and inclusion, really trying to install these principles within the Brussels policy community, that it was a very empowering, enriching time period where I met new people, where I learned new skills, where I developed new networks and felt I made a contribution. But I reached a point where it was too much and I had to find different sort of priorities. So I had to redefine my priorities. And then it's also to what I said earlier on, that I was disheartened by all the crises in the world, and it's almost like I didn't know where to start, contributing to changes or solutions. And so my daughter had an accident; she had to be operated twice, and there was sort of a moment where, I felt like the rug was pulled under my feet, and the balance that I had sort of established in my life was no longer existing, and I had to stop. And the stopping was very strange because, I took a few days off. But to be honest, I was sitting at home and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't watch TV, I couldn't read a book. I didn't know what to do because previously in my life, everything had been well organized. Everything was functional. Everything I did was for a reason. I had to get a solution. I had to finish a project, connect people, and there was no time for me. There was no time for reflection. Yeah, so I didn't know what to do with that newfound, that time that I all of a sudden had. So I basically first went back to work, but realized that I wasn't really very productive. And thankfully I had people around me in the professional context that were very, very understanding, including my boss, who said, take the time to figure out what you need to get better. And so first I slowed down, and then I decided to sort of take a break, use the summer to really disconnect. So part of that experience, for example, was not having any contact through mobile phone, telephone, computer, Twitter, SMS, WhatsApp, which I liked.
A complete online-offline detox.
Exactly, yes. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I was in a context where there was, green nature. Yeah. And it was calm. And so that allowed me to sort of basically calm down first and be occupied with myself and sort of other things that had absolutely nothing to do with politics and the world, which then slowly allowed me to sleep again. It slowly allowed me to be able to read the newspaper like a person does who is not involved in politics, and where I also could sort of think a little bit about what I want to, rather than what I think other people want from me or what other people need.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that, because I think it's a very vulnerable space that you're in now. And we see, or at least me in my context, my world, I see that there's this epidemic of burnouts happening, and some people speak about it very lightly, some people speak about it in a very responsible way, and some people don't admit it because it's also part of the software that we've downloaded from the society, that we are not supposed to show the vulnerability, and we're supposed to be hyperactive overachievers, over delivering on multiple projects that we are in. And that's why I opened with saying that that's how we used to know you, as the Deputy Director of German Marshall Fund's Brussels office, and as an author, as a speaker, as a leader of many projects which aim at empowering women here in Brussels context. So I'm wondering what is your do you already have clarity about what is your new stand, your new composition of your days? You're also a mom, so I see you're back to the GMF business. But I also assume, or from what I've observed, you cut down a little bit on your online presence. So it seems like you've developed these new self-care practices, and maybe you've established a new kind of maybe work-life balance, as it used to be called, or different kind of balance and distribution of activity. So have you reprioritized what you're engaged in, and have you already also, do you have a clarity about what is your next new stand or the projects that you will be involved in?
I mean, I only came back 2 weeks ago, so in some ways I'm still exploring sort of this new lifestyle, experimenting a little bit. It's difficult because on the one side, we're demanding flexibility at work when it comes to when we work and where we work, which I certainly benefited from, being a mother of a child and also wanting to spend some time with my daughter. So, I would work, I would go home to spend time with her, and then at home I would go back to the computer and continue working. And, sometimes spending an afternoon at home with her and also sort of doing work. So I'm really appreciative of these new means that digital technology kind of gives us, but there's a flip side to it that could also mean you never stop.
And there are no limits, because the technology allows us to continue working whenever the kids are sleeping, and so we never create that space for ourselves.
Exactly, yes. So certainly one rule I have is when I go home, I do not look at my work phone and I don't look at my work email. As a start, so I have my evenings back, so to speak. That's one part. The other is, and again, I'm recognizing, I am in a very privileged sort of space. I work for a think tank where, we're dependent on the political cycles, and at the same time, we all work on sort of different things, and there are sort of opportunities coming our way. So I pick and choose a little bit more as to what I want to do, and it's a combination of sharing the expertise that I have, but also looking for sort of new opportunities to learn something. But it's ultimately also about, requiring colleagues, my own institution, or sort of requiring a bit of a change of how we do things. And one of the things that was sort of, it's the hardest part, but in some ways also a bit of fun, is that sort of over the last year or two, I'm totally aware I'm challenging the system, because I'm usually the one in the room kind of, people, we are talking about, we need to find a policy solution for X, Y, and Z, or we want to do this. And I come in and I say, with sort of new approaches, new ideas, and, half of the room sort of looks at me and say, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about. We've always did it this way, or you don't have enough experience. And
you don't have enough experience.
Yeah. And my take is I do have, I have a different life experience, and I just have a different approach. And the old ways of doing things have not worked, so why not trying it differently? And the fact that we have fragmented societies, new parties arising with extremist views on the left and the right, is for me a sign that there are other people who felt like their voices were not heard. And so, we need to do things differently.
What does it mean concretely for your engagement in the Women's Project? Because you've led the WIIS, which is the Women in International Security project here, which also offers a beautiful mentoring program for women who are active in the international security defense policy making here in Brussels. You're also a co-founder of Brussels Binder, to which I'm inviting everybody who's listening. Please sign up. It's basically a database of women speakers in different kind of issues, which serves for organizers of events, conferences, and workshops whenever they're looking for speakers or hosts to find women speakers and experts, and to stop using this excuse that we don't have enough women out there to offer their opinion and expertise on different kind of subjects. I feel that Brussels Binder really had an impact on the way Brussels Bubble is organized and how the events look. There is in many parts of the policy making world, in some of them the manels, as we call them, the men only panels, are over. The organizers and also the keynote speakers are much more conscious of the fact that they need to request other women to be with them on the panel to stop with this bias. And so now I'm thinking, after this reflection period that you've been through, does it have any impact on your vision of which are the next projects for the women which are needed in town in terms of the form and substance in order to increase the impact? Have you arrived to some kind of conclusions which have shown you how we could be doing better or differently all these women empowerment projects in order to basically proceed more effectively or more quickly?
Well, yes and no. You're right. The Binder was privileged enough to come into fruition at a time period when there were various developments that helped or the society to pay attention to this, whether it was the Me Too movement, things that happened in the United States, just, the fact President Trump was elected and that got a number of women in the US on the streets and into politics. Now, we had Commissioner Georgieva, who really tried to make a point by increasing the number of women in management position. And now the president-elect, Ursula von der Leyen, who is also very adamant about having diversity, actually beyond gender, in the new commission. So this is wonderful, parallel developments that we could sort of benefit from and we are part of. I still believe in the things, a lot of the things that the women said whom I interviewed in the book that I co-authored with Claudia Calderhina on Women Leading the Way in Brussels, and their advice that they said, in terms of, you need to be authentic, and you need to have a partner at home that helps you, both in your work but also in the private sphere, so you partner together. You need to be really good in what you do. I think with my sort of experiences over the sort of past few years is networks among women are incredibly important, and I'm not just meaning networks, formal networks, but it's just us being together with it's with our female colleagues, our friends, other women we meet at conferences, that we build sort of alliances, we connect, and because I think we often realize we have similar experiences, and just the fact by coming together, even if it's just in an event, kind of supporting each other's messages, around the table, or in a coffee break, sort of sharing our contact details, I think it gets us a long way. So it's this collaborative, this, some people call it sisterhood, but just sort of recognizing each other sort of in the room, that I think this is important, and it continues to be more and more important. And then the other thing is that women, don't forget sort of what do they want, and sort of they are their first priorities, and then everything else comes after that. And with that also comes, you might have very different reasons for why you are for women's empowerment or opportunities for women or gender equality. And we need to recognize, still here in Europe, we have women with very different life experiences, and that means, coming from different regions, Central Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, but it also means rural and urban. It means different social classes. It means different ethnic diversities and different age groups. So it's sort of the acceptance, we are all women, but we're different. And so, the ways how we connect will be very, very different. Well, rather than sort of trying to avoid it or deny it and stay in our, Facebook bubbles or Twitter bubbles or whatever, I think we need to do more to sort of look for these connections with women who, might think differently, might not call themselves feminist, or, have had a different experience, but still see if there's something that connects us, so, we can continue on whatever we're working on together.
So that's why the book that you wrote with Claudia, Women Leading the Way in Brussels, was so important, because it finally started shedding light on what is the how of the women leaders in town. Which brings me to a question about what is feminine leadership for you, because it's the new word which finally makes it to the general policy, the institutional, the HR discourse, where many people are asking themselves if there is a universal definition of how we would like to see a modern, conscious woman leading towards the future, or is there different colorful varieties of this? And as examples, I'm thinking about obviously Ursula von der Leyen, who's already shown how big her stand for gender equality is. And obviously another example is my dear president Zuzana Čaputová, who's also shown beautifully in her campaign how you can bring a different kind of communication into politics. Both of them are different, coming from completely different spaces and cultural backgrounds. So I'm thinking now, what are your thoughts on what do they have in common as new modern women leaders? Where do you see differences? Is there something that each of us should be learning from each other, or is it really about each of us finding our own way of leading?
Well, I think I would doubt that both of them would define their leadership as feminist.
Feminine?
Oh, feminine. I'm certainly not somebody who would argue women are better leaders. And I think history has shown we've had very different leaders that weren't always as good.
Yeah. Good and bad of both genders.
They're good and bad on both sides. I think what we see, though, is by having more women in decision-making or leading positions, is that they often have a very different style or bring new attributes to the way of leading. And I think we've seen it with Angela Merkel. We've seen it with Ursula von der Leyen. There is this willingness, this openness, and this clear sign they're willing to listen. So they're not so focused on themselves, but they focus on the issue at stake. So there's they contribute to a particular environment that can lead to sort of compromises and finding a sort of joint resolution rather than a win-lose sort of situation. And so I think that's sort of something that is, very important to the moving forward, that it's not about you and your leadership position and, that you won, but it's about getting the issue, the subject matter forward, or finding a solution to a particular problem. And, the women I just named sort of have a track record on sort of bringing sort of people on board. Of course, also, making certain people angry, and it's more the people who feel like they're losing something about themselves, or because they're so used to the old way, because that's familiar, and they're a bit afraid about what the new way of doing things actually means.
I think it's also important that we start discussing more the subject of women in politics. We've discussed this obviously a couple months ago when I was embarking on this journey of figuring out how to bring in this, the women's aspect into my campaign that I was going through in Slovakia. And the other day I met another colleague, a woman activist in town, who raised the subject of women in politics, women in elections, and whether a European Commission can actually do anything to boost the women's readiness and the political parties' readiness to support women in elections. I'm thinking, what you're thinking about is, can we do something from Brussels as the European headquarters, let's say, where all the parties are headquartered, in order to help parties build, as if they were building the youth organizations, build their women's organizations, their women's chapters, in order to feed the funnel with more women who are then obviously more likely to vote differently and co-design different kind of policies.
I mean, I'm really, I was super happy to see, the number of women running for European Parliament, sort of like you, with mixed results, but I thought it showed a tremendous energy and enthusiasm from large part of the population that we've never really taken into account during elections. So that's a really, really good sign. And the more women we see here in Brussels, in the European Commission, or in the Parliament, or the leadership positions, is they all serve as role models for the next time around. Political parties clearly play a huge role in this, and for a variety of reasons. I think it is time that political parties really need to rethink about how they're structured and how they function and how they communicate. It is because of technological developments, but it's also about needing to be more inclusive if they want to get more voters. So Brussels can lead by good examples, but ultimately what needs to happen is back in the EU member states that, local chapters, national chapters need to encourage their communities to really reflect on sort of how you do things.
And I guess we as women must reflect on how we can support other women. That's a big one that I was getting all the time, people asking me, but how does it really look like on the ground? Do really women help each other? So that's also another topic for another conversation. One last thing that I'm really thinking about, if there's one piece of advice that you would like to share with women listening to us in particular, those who are at the beginning of their careers, who are also embarking on very ambitious career projects with a lot of, let's say, pro bono or not pro bono assignments on the side, really running around like crazy, trying to be of contribution and develop their brand and develop their careers. Some of them already have their families, just like you have your daughter. What is this one piece of wisdom that you have to share with them? Is it possible to design it in such a way that we can have it all, have careers and self-expression and family at the same time? Or is there something that we should start compromising on in order to protect our mental and physical and spiritual health?
Well, two phrases come to my mind. I mean, somebody whom I interviewed for the book that Claudia and I wrote said, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And I think there's some truth to it. And then life in one way or the other is about compromise. I mean, especially also when we're in relationships, it's at times, we're not in the same mind, so we need to compromise. So I don't think you can get away with this. But what I'm trying to certainly do now is, I come first. And if I am well, then the things I do, I can do well, and I can be useful for others. And it's a little bit, take your mobile phone. You always try to have the battery on full, and you don't want your mobile phone to die and be empty. And, you can basically say this about yourself. Make sure that your own batteries are full so you can actually operate. No, I think it is very important for women that they have elements in their life that they truly enjoy. And that is, can be family. It can be philanthropic work. It could be advocacy work. It can even be the job, colleagues, friends. But yeah, those are all elements that help us to recharge and feel that they're making a contribution and get the recognition.
Thank you very much for finding the space, creating the space for talking to us at this very new stage of your career and private life. So thank you again, and we wish you all the best in recreating the new path that you have ahead of you.
Thank you.